Emily just called John. So we're probably not going to be able to get that on for the 18th, but we still need Karis's. We need to.
Deadline to get today? Is the deadline to get anything into?
All right, good evening, everyone. This is the Board of Selectmen's meeting for Tuesday, January 10th, 2017. Our first item is meeting minutes from November 21st and November 29th.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from November 21st, 2016, November 29th, 2016, and December 6th, 2016.
December 6th, not quite ready yet. We're making some changes to that. We needed to. That's the medical marijuana hearing. We needed to list all the names of the people, so it's incomplete.
Okay, so I'll try that again. I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from November 21st, 2016, and November 29th, 2016, as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, future meeting dates. We're scheduled to meet on the 31st. We're a little bit late starting tonight because we're trying to come up with a date that we can meet prior to that for two reasons. One is that item 5 on our agenda, the dog nuisance recommendation, is going to have to be deferred for some procedural reasons because notice was not provided to the parties. We do have one of the parties here tonight, and we were looking at a date of January 18th, Wednesday. We also have the environmental data response that's due for the annual Massport filing, and Town Council's office is working on that. We don't have a draft yet. The filing deadline is the 20th. So we've just been told, while we were a little bit late getting on, that we need to notify the dog nuisance hearing again in the newspaper. It was noticed once. Back in November, we need to put a notice in again for hearing before this board. So presumably, we will not be able to get it into this week's paper and have time to have this hearing on the 18th. So we're probably looking at the 31st for the continued number 5. But if we can still hold the 18th, well, we confirm that we can get the report on the EDR response and have just a very short agenda that night, if that still works for everybody.
Sure.
Okay. February dates we're looking at tentatively are February 7th and 21st. No, the 21st is the school vacation week.
Yeah, right now it's not a problem for me, but I'll let you know if it is as soon as possible.
Okay. Tom?
I'm fine with it.
Okay. Right now we'll book tentatively the 7th and the 21st of February. And if we need to change those, we will at a later date. Citizen Speak. Do we have anyone tonight for Citizen Speak? Okay. Seeing none, then we'll move on to, so number 5 we're going to postpone. Number 6 is the town administrator's budget discussion, and we have members of the school committee and the school administration here, and also the chair of the warrant committee. So we're going to set aside some time for the town administrator and the town accountant, Amy Dexter. Amy, would you like to join us to discuss some very preliminary information about the budget? And Chairman Walker of the school committee and I did have a conversation on Friday, and because the school committee had noticed a meeting tonight, we do not have it scheduled as a joint meeting, but Mr. Walker may want to offer some comments on the school impact in a non-contingent budget. And if so, we'll go to that afterwards. But we're going to hear the presentation first.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair and Selectmen, for having myself and Town Accountant Amy Dexter here tonight. Let me start by mentioning that this process began in September. Prior to my arrival, there was a department heads meeting held by former town administrator Anne Marie Fagan and Amy Dexter, at which point the department heads and subsequently boards and committees were asked to come up with 2 budgets for fiscal year 18, both a contingent and non-contingent budget. For the benefit of those viewing on television, please let me explain briefly what both of those budgets what the marching orders were for those as they were requested. So the non-contingent budget, this budget includes expenditures level with their FY17 appropriation and then adjusted to include contractual obligations. And both myself and the town accountant will go through both of these expenditures for the town and school budgets. We'll probably review the revenue side of that first. But just to get to the contingent budget, the description of that and the orders that were, or the request that was given back in September to boards, committees, and department heads was to include any expenditures that the department head and or board or committee felt necessary to provide a level of service required to more effectively meet the needs of the towns and residents. So that's the starting point for the expenditure side of the ledger. Town accountant simultaneously reviewed FY07 through FY16 revenues to develop some very preliminary estimates. I'm going to turn it over to our town accountant to walk through some of those preliminary estimates to provide us with our revenue side of tonight's budgets. I don't know if you can see that well. I apologize. Let me see if I can
No,
zoom in on it.
it's pretty small.
Yeah. Anyone in the audience, if you haven't picked up the slides, please do. No. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. As of right now, the preliminary, and I stress that word preliminary, first pass estimates on general fund revenues are $95.7 million. That's excluding any other available one-time funds or from other special revenue funds. This is approximately $3 million above the FY17 budget of $92.7 million, or 3.2% increase. The main increase is related to the tax levy under Proposition 2.5, as well as new growth. New growth is an estimate that we received from the Board of Assessors, and that's coming in for FY18 and is estimated to be $572,000. So tax revenues, main portion of our revenues, limited under Prop 2.5. We also have local receipts, which right now are, the preliminary estimate is coming in level with FY17. The majority of that $7.2 million on local receipts line relates to motor vehicle excise taxes, and for 18, that's estimated to come in at approximately $3.5 million. The other large piece of that number is building and permits and licenses, and that's estimated to be approximately $1,040,000. Both of those estimates are all based upon historical trends. I've looked at the revenue trends from 2007 to 2016. Anytime something looked like it was unusual fluctuation, I threw it out, used some averaging. And as of right now, I'm not expecting them to come in significantly higher than what's in the 17 budget. Another large portion of that is trash revenues, and again, they're coming in level with historical trends, right around $880,000. That's the sticker program. And other than that, another large part of local receipts is the indirect costs that we charge off to the enterprise funds. A big portion of that calculation relates to group insurance. Group insurance in the non-contingent budget at this point in time is it's estimated to remain level with FY17. That's mainly because we're projecting an increase in premiums offset by the premium split that was negotiated with the collective bargaining units. So unfortunately, we don't have revenue streams that make up a significant portion of our revenue, so it's not going up much other than the Prop 2.5 limitations. And now I'll turn it back to Mike.
Sure. Just want to touch upon the state and local
Oh,
aid.
I'm sorry, yeah, I stopped there, didn't I?
Yeah. No, it's...
Sorry
yeah.
about that. Oh, you want me to, right?
Yeah. If you,
Okay. As of right now, the state budget is in the very, very preliminary stages, and we don't have a lot of visibility into where state aid is going to come in. So historically, at this point of time in the budget process, we're usually very conservative with that number. So the $10.2 million that we have in the preliminary estimate for state aid, or what I call local aid, is estimated to be 98% of 17, or a 2% decline. We are attending an MMA conference in Boston on the 20th and the 21st. At that time, the governor is going to be speaking to the status of the state budget, and we'll have a better idea of what we expect or can anticipate for state aid at the local level. The other piece of that is an expected increase in Chapter 70 funding. If you recall, last year during the fiscal year 17 budget process, town meeting approved the implementation of full-day kindergarten at no cost to those families. And with that, the expectation was that the following year, we would get increased Chapter 70 aid because it was now not a tuition-based program. That was estimated to be $950,000 at the time, but that number I did discuss with the Assistant Superintendent of School Business, Glenn Pavlicek, and at this point, we're estimating that to come in at approximately $880,000 to bring the total revenue of 95.7. The other available funds, at this point, free cash at the end of June 30th of 2016 was certified by the Department of Revenue to be 1.375. This free cash number shown in the FY18 budget column of 87,646, that only includes those items we've identified in the non-contingent operating requests that are non-recurring in nature, meaning they will need to be expended in FY18, but they're not expected to occur again in FY19 or future years. Right now, that number is made up of sick leave buybacks related to employee retirements. In the prior year, the FY17 budgeted number of $2.2 million for free cash use. That the main piece of that was $950,000 for the full-day kindergarten program. That was a one-time item that relates to the 880 above, as well as approximately $700,000 that was used for capital items to pay for those outright and not bond those. And then we also put some funds aside in the OPEB trust fund, as well as some monies aside for a master plan and some increased repairs and maintenance and consolidated facilities. All things at the time that were identified as one-time non-recurring expenditures. At this point in the budget process, we've only identified approximately $87,000 in 18. Okay.
So that gets us to our $96 million revenue estimate. Again, a very conservative number. I appreciate, having worked on many budgets in the city of Boston before, not necessarily in the month of January, so I appreciate two things. I appreciate the conservatism of the estimates so far coming through. A credit to Amy and the town and my predecessor. Secondly, I'd like to thank all the departments that created these two budgets and got them into Town Hall's hands by December 1st. This is something that I'm not familiar with. Normally we're hustling through February and March to put these numbers together in my previous life. So the fact that we were able to sit down with each of the town committees and school department and go through these numbers, I'd first like to thank all the people that put these numbers together from the expenditure side. And we can walk through some of the non-contingent and contingent highlights. But the fact that this process is live on January 10th with a pretty good picture, albeit preliminary, of what's going on as a snapshot in our town is, I'm very impressed with the process and all the work that was done by the departments, boards, and committees to get that into our hands. And we can walk quickly through some of the non-contingent numbers. As you can see, what we're looking for is a non-contingent budget. Again, it includes steps and some contractual obligations from the FY17 appropriation. If you look down, some of you can't see this, but on the town side, it's roughly $631,000 above FY17 net of one-time money, and on the school side, it's roughly $2.8 million over. Netting out, long story short, is the accumulation of expenditures for the non-contingent appropriation would net out to about $97.5 million, leaving us with a Again, it's preliminary. It's just a snapshot of where we are today of $1.5 million on the non-contingent budget. Flip to the next slide. The contingent budget, again, which, and I need to make this clear, this was expenditures that the department head and/or board or committee felt that would provide the level of service required to more effectively meet the needs of the residents of the town. So I won't call it a wish list, because we've walked through this with many of the department heads and boards and committees, and this is efficiencies. This is built-in efficiencies, things that would make the town more efficient, and I think would be an overall huge plus for the town. So if you walk through the same spreadsheet from a contingent budget side, you see a $1.4 million over last year, over FY17's appropriation, net of one time, with the school department coming in a little bit over $4.7 million. That nets out to a $5.1 million shortfall. Again, a snapshot of where we are in time. It's just that we're waiting for some revenues numbers to come in from the state, and we'll work the numbers back. We have sat down with many of the departments, boards, and committees and talked about the non-contingent and contingent budget, and we're working our way through Series 2 of those meetings with them, and it's been a very proactive dialogue with each of the departments and committees. I understand what they're talking about. I think they fully understand where the numbers have come in. So, again, I can't thank the teams involved to get us to where we are here, and can't stress enough that this is, you know, we're in a preliminary stage. It's January 10th as we head towards May's town meeting, and this is a snapshot of where we are today. So with that, we'll take any questions or comments you might have.
Just quickly, Mike, and if you can remember off the top of your head, just some of the highlights of what some of the, some of the increases are in the contingent budget in terms of, I mean, some of them I know, like, on the inspectional services, we're looking for the,
Code enforcement
code
officer.
enforcement. But can you hit a few other highlights in there, or?
Yeah, so to a basic overview, on the town side, we're looking to add about 16 or 17 employees, what I feel are very warranted and necessary. Take Madam Clerk's office downstairs, the public records legislation that was just filed. I think the records access officer might need a full-time employee down there just to handle that legislation that came into effect on January 1st. So something like that. Looking closely at a mechanic in the town, a strong general foreman mechanic. Obviously, we've talked in the past about the improvement of the fleet, both from a day-to-day operation to a more full-time replacement program. So that's something that we're looking at. But to quantify it in a ballpark, it's about 16 or 17 jobs on the town side.
All right.
Including the assistant town administrator position here in
That's
town
true,
hall,
yeah.
as we all know. But for members of the public who are watching, we do have an assistant town administrator who's really the full-time human resources director, and the idea really is to try to restore the resources that used to be available to the town administrator, especially now that the town administrator has a lot of additional duties.
Yeah, and Mike, a couple of those things that you just highlighted, I mean, they definitely bring efficiencies and long-term savings. For instance, like a mechanic.
Right.
Other towns do have one, and it does effectively keep the shelf life of the vehicles going, and when you're talking parts and those things. So I can appreciate that. And also with the town clerk's office, with the amount of work that they're doing now, and having to take on, elections, with weeks going beforehand. It's really it's a service to the residents,
Sure.
So I appreciate that, and I can understand it.
Yeah, just to further highlight that, it kind of came up during the capital committee meetings, but a lot of the departments don't even bother to take their vehicles to the motor pool at the DPW facility, because it's a black hole. It goes in there and just never comes back out.
Right.
They're just so on demand that they're contracting out their vehicle maintenance.
But and I think so. Our point, for people at home is that sometimes you get wary of saying, oh, that's more jobs, more people on a payroll. But really, in fact, when you're looking at it long term, projecting some of these key positions that we have either bring in revenue or they're able to create better efficiencies long-term, so it's really a cost savings, when you look at it long-term, so.
Yeah. And I was remiss to say that in a lot of the back and forths with the departments, we did do some, really, do you need this money or do you need that position? And it was a very productive conversation, and, you need to see both sides of it with the department. And some things are not necessary, quite honestly. And I don't see that $5 million number standing where it is. I see that number being trimmed to a more efficient number. And again, we're just working with what we have for estimates right now, and we'll hopefully scale that number down.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and along the points that David and Tom made was that some of the, what we'll call the town side positions, some of them are under independent boards, such as the library. I believe the library trustees have requested some additional resources for the library because there's such a high demand for the services there.
Right.
So, so not all of them are actually departments that report to the town administrator and indirectly to us. We probably should talk, do you have more that you want to add before we talk a little bit about process and where we go from here?
No, I think
see
that's
what-
everything we have, yeah, from the revenue and the expenditure side.
So the charge of department heads, maybe you can speak to that, has been to go back and take a look at some of these, in the non-contingent budget in particular.
Yeah.
Which is, for people watching, that's the balanced budget, not a Proposition 2.5 override,
Yeah.
just the balanced budget. But there's been a request now that department heads work with you, Mike, to come up with how we would, we're still hoping we're going to have some additional revenues coming in, and we might be able to change the numbers but we're still looking at a gap of 1.5 in the non-contingent budget.
Yeah.
So we have to start thinking about ways to close that gap.
Yeah, so we sat most recently today with Joe Lynch and fine-tuning some of his numbers and the percentage of that cut that he's going to have to take on the non-contingent side, as well as Chief King, the police department. He's aware of what number we need to get to, and Jack Grant as well. We sat down with him earlier this week. So that second round of talks that you're talking about, Madam Chair, has started to take place. We wanted to let everybody know where we stood and what the picture looks like, and it's a developing situation, if you will. But the departments have been very, very proactive in working with us and trying to get us to a place where we can balance the budget.
Yeah, clearly, if we have to cut 1.5 million from the non-contingent budget, it's going to be an ugly budget. If we don't find additional revenue someplace.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. So again, as our town accountant said, we'll find out some more information next week, not this coming weekend, but the weekend after, when the governor comes back from Washington and hopefully gives us some good news. But I appreciate the conservative number that plugged in right now. It's
I think that's all you can really do
Yeah.
at this point. I
At
don't
the stage of the
see-
game.
Yeah.
If I could just add one thing on the revenue. What also the plan is that we normally do, and Mike and I will do again this year, is, as of right now, we're just closing the books for December. So that's usually the time I take the first pass look at the current fiscal year to see if anything is trending up or down from where the previous years have been. So in the upcoming weeks, we'll take a look at that also to see. But that's usually just the local receipts number, that $7 million number. So we're not going to find anything there that's going to save
When
the
you really
day.
come right down to it, there's only two key numbers.
Right.
It's either the permitting fees
Right.
or motor vehicle excise.
Right.
Those are the only numbers that move. Nothing else does
Right.
historically, to
Right.
a large degree.
Yeah, and the excise tax number has kind of gone up
Yeah,
and down.
it's-
Amy,
yeah,
Amy
it's-
could speak to it, but it's kind of all over the place. It's been peaking, and there's been some valleys. And some people talk about, a lot of people lease vehicles nowadays. When they have to turn those vehicles over,
They turn them over quicker, yeah.
there's a new excise bill that goes with that. So
And with that being said, for FY16, motor vehicle excise came in at $3.9 million. That, when you look at the trend, is extremely high. There's no way I would recommend that we even consider coming close into that, because when you have a high year, the next year usually is going to dip. So that's why we used an average. It's very hard to predict. I think I get up there here and say that every year. It's very hard to predict that one.
It is. It's very true.
All right, so in terms of process and kind of where the the process goes from here. Tomorrow night, there's a warrant committee meeting, and we'll give the chairs and the members of the other boards and committees who are here a chance to weigh in if they'd like to say anything at this preliminary stage. But just in terms of what the calendar looks like, so tomorrow night, there's a warrant committee meeting. Mr. Dennehy's going to go to the warrant committee, give this same set of
packet, yeah.
spreadsheets package to the warrant committee and give them an update on where things are at this stage. February 1st is the date that the warrant committee is targeting to have Mr. Dennehy come and present a more complete
Balanced
budget
budget.
picture. So that, and that gives 3 weeks for the different departments and then for them to go back to some of their independent boards and committees to talk about some of these numbers and work with Mr. Dennehy to start refining some of these numbers. And hopefully we'll have better numbers, at least from where the governor's budget is going to come in at. And then we'll have to see what happens in the Senate and the House, and we can reach out to our legislators and see what their input is as to where they think it's going in their chambers. Obviously, we may not know where the Senate and House are going to be at until
Yeah.
June, but at that point, we should have a sense anyway of where the governor's budget is. That's probably a pretty good starting point for us.
Whether it continues to hold, but for the past several years, the governor's budget's been the lower budget. That wasn't always the case.
No.
Back when we were on the warrant committee, that was not the case, but it has been for the past few years.
So we should have a much clearer picture on February 1st when we present to the warrant committee.
We should.
We'll have some revenue numbers in and,
We should. And then, and of course, the warrant committee is an independent moderator-appointed committee, is going to go down on its own separate track, and we probably should speak a little bit to the changes that we made in having the town administrator taking on this new responsibility of presenting a budget. But before we get to that, the warrant committee is going to go down its own track of interviewing all the departments that are already starting to do that and start putting together their own projections. But they're going to take this information, and this is going to be a new presentation to the warrant committee where the town administrator is actually coming in to present contingent and non-contingent budgets. And February 1st, those numbers are probably still not going to be definite or final. We're still going to have to go through the process of going through the spring, which we always do. There's been some confusion, and so let's try to clear that up on the record as to when an override election would take place. There's been some thinking that it would take place in April when we have the regular town election, and that's not what Milton's practice has really been. Milton has always had town meeting speak to the budget first, present the budget to town meeting first 2 weeks in May. It's probably going to take 2 weeks this May, given all the articles we've got, which we'll talk about next. Let town meeting vote on it, and assuming town meeting passes both the balanced budget and the Proposition 2.5 override contingent budget, then the question would go to the voters in June. So the voters are always going to decide in the end whether to pass a Prop 2.5 override. But that election would take place in June rather than April, and I know there was some confusion among a lot of different people about that, probably because it's been 8 years since we've had an operating override, so it's not as fresh in people's minds as it perhaps had been at one time. So the difference really this year is that under the statute that was passed by town meeting in 2015 that our board and the Town Government Study Committee worked on, it's presented some new responsibilities for the town administrator in terms of the budget. And this is our first year going through it. Last year, Mrs. Fagan, who's here in the audience tonight, did kind of a modified version of that because she worked with the warrant committee when they told her this is what we're looking at to cut for a non-contingent budget. On the non-school side, the town administrator was able to work with all the departments, including the library, the parks, that really were not under her, were reported to separate boards, and came up with an agreement for the non-contingent budget. So that really was the start of it, but it's different this year. The statute's in full effect, and it requires the town administrator to prepare and present to this board and to the warrant committee a budget. We've got 2 budgets going this year, so that adds a further complicating factor to it. We're also in the middle of a transition, which complicates it even more. So I think we're at a good point. There's been a lot of work done by the department heads, by Mrs. Fagan, by Mr. Dennehy, and Amy Dexter, our town accountant, and others who have, Glenn Pavlicek from the schools, who I know has played a big part in the budget every year with working with Amy and the town administrator. But as we go through this process, we're probably going to find we have to have several discussions about it because the statute itself is not entirely clear as to when it has to be presented or what the form would be. And what we're talking about tonight is preliminary. And a question for us to think about going forward might be when is the right time for the town administrator in the course of this to present it? Because if it's very early, those numbers are probably going to change considerably by the time it gets to the warrant committee. So how helpful is that to the warrant committee? The thinking was that we wanted to make town management, and so not just the town administrator, but all the town department heads, town management. Tom, you can speak to this because you were really the driving force behind it over the last number of years. To have town management present to a volunteer committee like the warrant committee what the town department heads is a team that has to manage this building and all the other town facilities, what the town department heads think is what's needed for a budget, and then have the warrant committee question it, do the due diligence, make a recommendation, which might be different in the end, but at the same time, at least it's giving management more of a seat at the table and more of a voice, rather than just having a group of volunteers, which in our day was how it was. It was a 15-member group putting together basically the town budget with some input from a former town accountant, but not as much. And so we've been trying to shift that dynamism to really put more of the responsibility and accountability on the town management and away from volunteer members so it's the start. We're going to go through this process. There's probably things we're going to learn from it this year that we're going to be able to apply next year, but I think our team is working pretty well here and working very hard to get all of this to the point we're at. So hopefully that gives people some understanding of what the process is. It's going to be an experience to go through it and see the numbers change. And again, that $5 million number, which is our shortfall, I mean, for the media who are in the room and who are watching on TV, and for the people who are watching on TV, that's not an override number. That's just what the preliminary gap is. But as revenues change and as we look at do we cut some of these expenditures that are recommended, that number is going to come down, because we usually start with a big number and then we whittle it down, or the revenue increases to help reduce it on its own. So that number is going to change, and people shouldn't hear that number. It's a big number, but they shouldn't think right away that here in January this $5 million number is what town meeting is going to be voting on May. That's not going to be the case. So we know that's going to change. So hopefully that addresses the process and where we go. Do any other comments or questions from our board for Mr. Dennehy or Mrs. Dexter?
No, just a comment in terms of what you were saying in terms of the timing of submitting the balanced budget. I think it still has to be early in the game. Even though the numbers may be still somewhat preliminary, at least the revenue numbers are preliminary. I would hope that the expenditure numbers are relatively solid.
And they are.
And what you give into the warrant committee then, okay, the revenue numbers, are not concrete yet, but here was a methodology that we used to balance the budget, so you can see where we trimmed, how we trimmed, what the methodology was. As funds become available, you can kind of use that similar methodology to add back.
And I think that's for February 1st, the numbers will be in firmer shape at that point. Still subject to change, but a little bit more concrete than they are tonight. All right, I know we've got, if not most of the school committee members here, and Chairman Walker and I did have a conversation on Friday, and he may want to offer some comments, and we've also got the chair of the warrant committee here. Amy, you might want to stick close by in case we have questions or comments. So if Mr. Walker or any member of the school committee or Mr. McLean would like to join us, please feel free to do so. We're running ahead of schedule tonight, so we have some time.
Leroy.
Good evening, Leroy.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, the good news is between Mr. Dennehy, Chairwoman Cronin, and Mr. Hurley, you said most of what I had to say, so that's the good news. And I'd like to say a word about the process, though. Dr. Pavlicek and I met with Town Administrator Dennehy, Ms. Dexter, and Ms. Fagan, and as Katie alluded, I had a conversation with her on last Friday. While we would expect nothing less, I wanted to compliment all of you on the collegiality of the process. I mean, it's clear that we're all in this together, we're all on the same page, we're trying to achieve the same objective. So while we'd expect nothing less, I think it's worthy of note, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just a little history. Last year, we, in conjunction with the town, created our first 5-year financial forecast, and that said in pretty stark terms that the expenses would be, in our projections, exceeding the revenues consistently. On the school side, we did a pretty rigorous drill down in that analysis, and if you simply look at what we're calling level service and the legal obligations, contractual obligations, and any enrollment obligations that we have to meet. The growth there, we thought, just for level service would be between 5% and 6%. So that tells us that this question about overrides is one that we're going to have to face as a town every few years. In this particular budget, as you see, the share for the schools is 1.6 million in terms, I'm sorry, 1.26 million in terms of a cut. That equates to roughly 21 positions.
Ugly.
It's ugly. And this is the juncture for the town where we have to decide, do we invest or do we not invest? What we're seeing on the school side is all sorts of good news. I made some remarks at the annual town meeting last year about the state of the Milton Public Schools. I can report that the news is even better now. We have students that are excelling. At your last meeting, Member Burns talked about the girls' cross-country team. We're having athletes recruited by Division I schools. On the academic side, our students are excelling. They're getting accepted to some of the best schools in the country. In terms of music, arts, debate, everywhere we're seeing excellence. So the challenge for us is how do we create more excellence for more students and sustain what we have. We've got roughly $1.9 million in priorities that we identified for an override that we feel are absolutely necessary to sustain this excellence. And if you look at what we're seeing in terms of some important trends, in terms of enrollment at the middle school and high school, those are roughly about 1,000 and 1,000. We're seeing middle schools down a little bit, high schools up a little bit, but those are holding fairly steady. But here's the interesting thing. If we look at kindergarten enrollment, and we track that over the last 5 or 6 years, which we've been doing, normally the way that you project that, and we have a firm that does this for us, you look at births, you project forward 5 years, and you say, if 100%, which is conservative, you say if 100% of those students enroll, this is how many students we expect to have. What we're seeing consistently as a trend is that those numbers are being exceeded by 30% each year. What does that mean? That means that in the ensuing 5 years, people are moving in. So that makes our responsibility, I think, much more stark in terms of should we invest, should we not invest? I really don't think we have a choice. I think that the trust that's been placed in all of us, and I want to be clear, I think town meeting, the selectmen over, for as far back as I can remember, have supported the school. So I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'm also talking, hopefully, to the taxpayers that are watching. I think the choice that we're going to have to present to them is, here are some key priorities that we need your help to continue to invest in, or here are some dramatic cuts that we couldn't absorb. We can't absorb that kind of cut. We can't do it. 20 positions, 21 positions, I think would devastate the schools at each level and would simply tear apart all of this work we've been doing. Now, mind you, over these last few years, as Katie alluded to, we haven't done an override since 2009. So we've been absorbing some small cuts, and those have impacts. But the good news is the trust that you've placed in us and the resources that you've provided, largely in terms of the advancement budget, have paid off. So we're starting to see the benefits of those investments. So quite simply, I don't think we have a choice. Tom, you talked about how you calculate what the cuts are and what you put back. So if you look at the way that Town Administrator Dennehy has constructed this budget, in the totals for the town budgets and the schools and Blue Hills is roughly 80-20 on each sheet, a little different. Yep. So we would, of course, expect as we get down the line and see what the override looks like.
They go back in that same ratio.
They go back in that same ratio. So I think, I'm going to end where I started. We're all in this together. We certainly have that sense, so I feel like we're on the same team. I think we have an education campaign that we need to do. I don't think we should assume, I'm certainly not assuming that just because we think it's so, people are going to understand why they need to vote for this. But I think as we lay out in more specific terms, and as Katie said, I think over the next few weeks this will take more shape. We'll be able to put more specificity with the numbers. But I think we have to get started in terms of educating our taxpayers and our voters why this is an imperative. I see it as an imperative. The schools see it as an imperative. So we're in full support of an override, and I'm sure you are too, but now we have to make sure that all the people who get to decide understand that.
Actually, one thing that Chairman Walker said reminded me of something that I should have mentioned when we talked a little bit about the process, and that is that what's different this year compared to a lot of other years is that this year builds on last year, in which we were initially planning on a contingent and a non-contingent budget. And for a variety of factors happening and kind of all coming together at the same time, which included a different way, thanks to Tom Hurley, of pushing it, of handling the stormwater utility charges, which were going to be a big chunk of what an override would have been. Handling that through a separate fee, that plus some savings and some insurance monies in the budget, and some additional state aid that came in that we were not expecting this time last year, that ultimately came in as we went through the spring, that really forestalled the need to pursue the contingent budget, or the override budget last year. And the agreement among all of the boards and committees, including the warrant committee and the library trustees who are not here tonight, and the school committee and this board, was that, okay, and we told this to town meeting last May, was okay, we're going to defer it this year. We think we can get through. We're not going to have to lay off anybody in the non-contingent balanced budget last year. So we're going, because of those savings and because of handling stormwater the way we did, we're going to defer the override question to this year. So that's why when we came into September, October timeframe, and we were, at that time, Mr. Denny, he was not on board, we were working with Anne Marie Fagan as the town administrator, and the discussion we had with her was the department head should prepare two budgets, because that's what we had talked about last year. And at that time, we talked about the fact, and we've already decided among our board, that assuming town meeting passes an override budget, we're going to put that question on to the voters, and we're going to schedule a special meeting for June. We haven't figured out the date yet, that'll come later. But we've already had that discussion early in the fall because we knew what the discussions were, having been a big part of the discussions, but with Lee Michaels' committee, with Lil Roy and the school committee, but having had those discussions last year, we were building on that. That doesn't happen every override year. That made this year a little bit unique, and that's why perhaps when there was some talk about having joint meeting in the fall, we really wanted to hold that off because we knew what the outcome was last year, and we wanted to let this new statute play out. And again, we may have to make some adjustments as we go forward, but that was the idea we had coming into this year.
Right, and I agree with that. The difference last year in terms of previous years when we've needed an override, for the most part, it's been, you were selling the override on doom and gloom, that if we don't get it, we lose these many jobs. Last year, we couldn't say that. We certainly needed more positions. On the town side, we definitely need them. On the school side, there's need for them.
Yeah.
But it made a whole different dynamic in trying to, and I hate to use the word market the override, but that's kind of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. As opposed to saying it's going to mean this many layoffs, we want to add these people, and here's why we want to add them.
Right.
And it's a whole different education process. And I think to a degree we're going to be like that this year too. To really get where we want to be, we're going to add positions.
That's right. I think we're saying both things. I think we're saying that here are some key investments on the town side and the school side that will have a dramatically positive impact. And we're also saying that we can't give you the level of service and the quality of service and the character that you've become accustomed to if you don't approve an override, because there are some pretty dramatic implications on both the town and the school side.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So as we go through the next few weeks and months, impacts will, and the warrant committee is going to do this on their own anyway, impacts will be discussed and will become more of something to inform the residents as to where we're going and what we need to consider for these budgets. Is there any feel free to stay here, Mr. Walker, if you want to join us. Mr. McLean, would you like to join us and add anything about the process or the schedule or anything from your committee's end?
Sure, thanks very much, Katie. I'll just add that I think that the intent of the process change is excellent, and that I have leaned heavily on Anne Marie and Amy over the last couple of years as a volunteer, and getting additional assistance I think is appropriate and necessary, and it's appreciated. And I don't yet have your cell phone number, but I intend to have it soon. I'd like to compliment you also, Mr. Dennehy, on getting to this point at this date.
Thank you.
I think that this is really helpful, and it's a great step forward. And I wanted to thank you, Katie, for noting the process. I think you described it well. Of course, the warrant committee does have its own track and potentially even its own priorities in some cases, as the responsibilities and accountabilities there to town meeting have not changed. So we'll continue that process of reconciling the numbers and recommending a budget to town meeting, as we always have, but this will lighten the burden, certainly, and a bit, and in the end, I hope that it will create a more informed and well-constructed budget for the town meeting to consider.
Michael, the good news is we hope it's going to lighten the burden on the budget, because the bad news is we have 17 non-budget articles coming your way tomorrow, and that's going to be a challenge for the warrant committee. There's a lot on
The
your
joys of not
plate.
having a fall town meeting.
2 of them are the planning board's fault. A couple of them are Leroy and the town government study committee's fault, but we've got our share of the blame too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
And your
Thank you
meeting,
both.
the warrant committee meetings are televised, so
Thank you
anybody
both.
who's watching, and that wasn't always the case until a couple of years ago, so anybody who's watching wants to hear some of these budget presentations by the departments, that's the place to tune in and watch the warrant committee meetings and hear the discussion, because part of the change in the town administrator, and we may have to discuss this more and figure it out as we go along, but we're no longer really having, the police budget used to get presented by the town administrator, got discussed at this table with the police chief sitting here, and then we would approve it and send it to the warrant committee. We're on a different track this year. Those are really coming through the town administrator, and the statute's a little unclear on that. We may have to clean it up a little bit. But so as a result, people who are watching our meetings are not hearing the detailed departmental level discussion. They're not hearing what is the fire department looking for additional overtime or an additional position or something, and is the inspectional services department, what are their needs, what's working well for them, what's not working well, where do they have needs. So they're not hearing that so much at our meetings anymore. They will if there's a quarterly report that a department head, we can probably explore a little bit more with them budgetary aspects of some of their operations, but that the place for the residents to hear that more is going to be the warrant committee this year going forward. So those are the meetings to tune into. So February 1st should be when all the boards meet with the warrant committee, with the town administrator and management, and we'll have more of a presentation at that time.
Yeah, the board's mostly under the town administrator's responsibility on February 1st. We're starting tomorrow night with some of the other departments that have independent boards.
I think the library trustees might want to attend on, or at least be notified of the meeting on the 1st so that they can.
Yeah, we
meet if they
invite,
need to.
we
You're inviting all
invite
the
everybody to
elected
come,
boards,
for
yeah.
sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else from anybody? Or anyone here who's here and who
Thank you.
hasn't joined us? Anyone else, any comments? All right, thank you all very much. And to Amy and Mike, thank you all. Okay, we still have some other items on our agenda, just before 8 o'clock. Item number 7 is the Maya nominations and elections, and this relates to the meeting we'll be going to on January 20th and 21st.
I'll move to appoint Kathleen Conlon as the board's voting delegate for the election of directors of the Massachusetts Interlocal Insurance Association Property and Casualty Group.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right, item number 8 is the articles for inclusion in the May town meeting warrant. And we've discussed most of these. I think we need to update on a couple of them. And I'm not sure if we have all of the updates. Let's see. Why don't we just go through them kind of one by one? The adoption of the military pay statute, I believe we've already we voted all of these, but we voted that. There haven't been any changes to that one. Amending Chapter 13 of the general bylaws is the housekeeping article. We've already voted that.
Yep.
Consolidated Facilities Revolving Account. We had a question, Tom, I think you were the one who raised the question about a cap on the spending.
Yeah.
And I think that's, the thinking on that was that it would be handled through the recommendation. The article does ask to determine a limit on the total amount that may
All
be
right.
expended. So,
Fine.
so some of this will get worked out through the recommendation.
That's fine.
Okay, Chief Procurement Officer is the Town Government Study Committee. I thought I saw, was there a request from them asking that we co-sponsor this one?
I did see something from Rick Neely. I'm not sure specifically what. Let's see here. Yeah. Let's see.
Yeah, I think he was looking to have a conference, and I don't know whether that's
Yeah.
something that we might want to consider co-sponsoring. This one, I believe this is one that's also going to be handled through the recommendation, because it's just to see if the town will vote to create the position in town government of Chief Procurement Officer, to set the duties, responsibilities, authority, and qualifications of such position, and to see what sum the town will appropriate. So that may be one we want to consider co-sponsoring.
Yeah, I would think so.
Okay. Do we want to take a vote on that so that we can let Rick Neely know?
Sure. So, and the vote is basically that we'll co-sponsor that.
Co-sponsor that.
If they'd like, yeah, if
So-
they've asked.
So, yeah, I'll make a motion to co-sponsor the Chief Procurement Officer article.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. There's a citizen's petition regarding an appropriation for the playground planners.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this requires funding, so it's going to be part of the budget.
Has the capital committee discussed it?
No, not at all. The first we saw of it was this week, I think, or whenever this thing came. But we didn't see it as a capital committee at all. That became.
Didn't in a previous year, didn't the playground planners come in and meet with the
They
capital
did,
committee? and
yeah,
ask
yeah.
for a
This time, though, they
recommendation?
did not.
Okay.
So, I mean, it seems pretty clear that there's no money in a non-contingent appropriation to fund that.
Maybe not out of operating expenses, there's still, it could be considered as a one-time
Perhaps
money
one-time
request
money,
for
yeah.
free cash. It's a
They've
citizen-
done an incredible job.
Yeah, they
I
have.
just want to note that. They've done a really, really strong job at fundraising in a very...
They have. They've
in
gotten
a quick period. And, so
close to halfway
I
there.
think we need to really consider this because it's a human service, quality of life thing. And it affects a lot of the people who move into the town who aren't yet in the school system, where they're getting something, where I think that we ought to consider it. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, it's a citizen's petition, so
Yeah.
it's going to go forward as a town meeting article.
Right.
We'll see what the warrant committee recommends. It might be something that, when we talk about, use of free cash, that might be an appropriate area to consider it. The next one is the fundamental speed limit change, which we've already voted to submit. The grant of the easement, that was in final form. Planning board submitted the Great Estate Plan Unit Development Zoning. Increase the tax on the sale of alcohol article. I thought we were doing some additional follow-up on that one. And I thought, we talked about October versus May for that, and I'm not sure if,
Yeah, that may
Town council-
need some time. We need to get some more information from town council.
did anything come over?
No,
in the
no,
last
we
week?
had asked him to take a look at if the town has the ability to levy that 1% tax. Mr. Flynn's working on
Yeah, we
that.
just need to get that information back before we can move on that. I
Right.
think that, obviously, it's a much-needed funding mechanism for the Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition, but, you want to get it right, and you want to get the full support if the people believe in it, and I think so. A little more time might be necessary.
All right, and the way it's drafted is as a home rule petition.
Correct.
And all right, so we did discuss it, and we did vote, we did support submitting it, assuming we get some questions answered, although we did talk about October versus May. We may decide as the process plays out that we may need to pull any one of these articles or more. Okay, the next one is 2 Adams Street, the home rule petition for a liquor license. This one was drafted a little differently by town council than what we had received from Attorney Ned Corcoran, so we may need to just confirm that, well, master plan appropriation, it's already been voted and discussed. That one is in final form. That's also been approved by the planning board. The Parkway Plan Unit Development article is relating to the Ice House property, and this is a planning board article. I understand there's some disagreement between the planning board and the owner of the property, and there may be some, so there may be some further discussion of that. Okay, the personnel bylaw is the Town Government Study Committee's article. The Special Purpose Stabilization Fund is the roadway article, Tom, that you would request to be put forward, and we did vote that one the last time. Were there any open questions on that, or is that in final form?
I think, I mean, because it's just kind of to see what amount, but I think the only question is to, was whether to fund that with an, whether to add some override money to that as a, it would be there either way, but if there's no override, it's just kind of a fund that's there, and when money falls out of the sky, you put it in there, but.
Right, in other words, it's not right now built into that $5 million shortfall we're
Correct.
talking about.
Correct.
Okay, so that's probably going to have to be part of the discussion as we move forward on the budget. We also have from the planning board a temporary moratorium on recreational marijuana. And the traffic commission recomposition, it's actually a little bit broader than that because it also would relate to the duties and responsibilities of the traffic commission, but so that's the final one that's in our package. And in talking with town council, we revised that to not set out what the changes we'd be seeking in the article, but just put in the article a request that the town revise the membership, the officers, the duties, and the responsibilities, because that would give us a month or two to try to flesh out the changes that we want to make, given that we realized last week that there had been an article revising the traffic composition that was voted subsequent to the bylaws that are on the town website, so those are a little bit out of date.
Okay.
So we have some further changes. So that's the universe of the articles that we have. There's, I believe, 17 of them. So with the warrant closed last week, these are all capital committee. We don't have that one. Is that in here, Emily? Yeah, I skipped over it in reading them.
Yeah, it's in there.
It's on the list, but I'm not sure, it's not in the package.
No.
Oh, okay, all right, it's, we have it, it just didn't get into the package that we already received. And that was just to change the okay, so that's just to change the amount and the years. Yes, Lee Michael, why don't you go up and join us?
Sorry, I didn't hear, was Fire Needs Committee on the list? I didn't hear that one go by, but it was my understanding that they were submitting one.
We have not received anything.
No.
It was emailed to me, and I asked them to send it to you last week.
We didn't receive it.
Okay.
What was it requesting? An appropriation or a?
I think I may have filed it already, I'm sorry. I don't have it right off the top of my head, but they certainly sent me an article